Hello. Schubert, storyteller. This impromptu theme and variations carries the tonality of his latest and variously last sonata. B-flat major is this kind of pastoral color of harmonic mood, as well as something appeased, but also something luminous from inside out. It's not the bright sunshine of A major, G major, but it's something, it's almost like a storytelling by a grandpa or grandma to a grandchild. And I have always wondered, what is it that makes composers like Schubert repeat what they say, musically speaking, the rhetoric of the repetitivity. Because after he exposes the second bar, again, this time with G, but still the first D, and then in octaves. And then comes the moment of concluding to the dominant. And then he goes in the second half when he finishes. To the dominant. ABA. We're back in the opening. Second time, and a third time down. So I have always wondered, why does that happen? Because when I used to study in the Paris Conservatory, I was a young teenager who thought that when I was told la deuxième fois en écho, which means in French, translated of course, second time something is repeated in the echo of the first time. As if you don't do a different color, it's boring. And I think that this is the major problem. We don't want to keep the attention of the listener in a gimmick way. We want to tell the story with the words of the composer. And the beauty of it is, and that's what I think I came to understand as a teacher rather than when I was a student, when I asked my teachers who didn't answer me. Mostly because they never answered me. Pedagogically, they wanted me to figure it out. And if I didn't, then it sort of vanished and it remained one more unanswered question. I had so many. The values of slow movements in Haydn's sonatas, why are they written in 16th notes when they're played slower than the 8th notes of the first movement by being subdivided? And I thought since then that it's because this way you have longer phrase bar lines, stretch between bar lines. But that you didn't tell me, I think of that. And perhaps I'm wrong too, but I share it with you. And I would like to hope that it might help somebody who wonders the same question. So in this case, why do composers like Schubert, and again, because the simplicity of the texture, the simplicity of the message, the melody is tonic dominant harmonized, 2, 5, 1, 1 to the D5. So you can say, okay, it's banal, is okay. No, I think it's because when you use common words to say something extraordinarily meaningful, like I love you, You can say it, I love you to your pet as well, which is as meaningful if you say it to your child, but you also can say it, I don't know, to your faith or to your favorite dessert, or in a way, we want to place a real meaning to the common word, or in this case verb, like I love you. And I think that when we restate it, it becomes a term of endearment. I love you, I really love you. And I don't think it necessarily needs to be colorized in a dynamic contrast like publishers write, or sometimes perhaps composers suggested. But in any case, if you're the performer storyteller, you can very well accept to just repeat it for the meaning of it without to try to change the color. It's a nice effect, but I don't think it's necessary, because I think that the repetitivity is part of the expression. And therefore you take common words, but you use them for extraordinary meaning, or something that is very meaningful. So if there were verbs for I love you that were different synonyms for every occasion that you use it, as many as they are and many as they are, perhaps, of course I don't have a great vocabulary in English, alas, but I would say that probably you run out of synonyms, and people wouldn't know what you really mean if they don't use it too. And so in a way it's an interaction between the recipient of the expression for whom you say I love you, and the person who receives it, who has to feel that it means that you single this person. It's not just I love you among many other things, people, places, tastes, moods, music, art. I think it's a singling choice, and therefore I find that in interpretation one should say, I accept the texture. I accept that Schubert doesn't need to be sugar-coated or differently coated for each time he retells it in a different way. Then they're coming now to the accompaniment part. The left hand has staccato on the downbeats for the bass notes, more pizzicato than staccato, or wet staccato. But obviously the harmonization in the second, third and fourth, eighth notes is the harmonic feeling. So it has to be as soothing as also purposely left itself in the secondary area, because the melody has to be heard, but you have to choose how much you want that level to be up. You don't want to play trumpet with harp, you could want to play two harps, where the melody is spawned by the accompaniment, or then tenderly voiced out, played deep in the keys for the melody, and the accompaniment becoming clearly one hand playing two hands. If it was two hands, you'll play the pizzicato with pedal resonant, like a pizzicato with vibrato. Brum, brum. And then the melody sitting on top with its own cradling that is on the downbeat. So you would like to go from D to B, from A to E, from the D to the G, through that to C and F, the circle of Fs, again. And then you open into the diminished seventh, where the two hands go exponentially expanding, with the diminished seventh, triggering a drop of minor into the serene B-flat major of the opening key. And I think when people speak in musical terms of simplicity, it's not about being simple compared to complex. It's more about being in the flow. And that doesn't mean and shouldn't mean that the organization of capsulated 4 bars by 4 bars sentence should be essentially not to drop away from the wagon if the train goes on and you like are lost. It's more about allowing to breathe with the metronomic beats which breathe themselves. An impulse tension releases harmonically and rhythmically. Bach already does it in the first prelude, only the accompaniment portion, not needing a melody but organically harmonized. Here you have that. As simple as it sounds, exactly simple, but not simplistic, complex, but not difficult to follow. I would say clear. I suggest the fetching pianistically of the deep basses, the further ones, open the elbow, attach an importance to play the bass note only when you touch it, as if you have a second left hand for the bass notes and a primary left hand for the harmonization of the second and third and fourth eighth notes. And shift faster than the beat, so you touch before you play to control how much you want, especially the lowest keys, which are heavier on the piano, in order to be soft from the edge of the key, where they speak right away because of the action of the piano being heavier in the lower register. Then in the second half, he uses octave for some, and then single notes for those. And then the melody in the opening was single line in the right hand. But in the second half, it's a chorale harmonized in 3 parts, like a chorus. And back to the single line. So he alternates the melody like a lead German art song in the right hand and accompaniment in the left hand. Ein schönes Mädchen und deinen Sohn. I'm making up gibberish German. But the point is that it reminds us so many of his beautiful lieder who are written like that. And in the piano, when he writes, or through the piano, he uses the medium of a German art song without the lyrics. And then he makes variations in this impromptu number 3. And you have this sense of flotation around a pivot in the center, which would be the dominant syncopated in the left hand viola part, and the cello part with half notes steadily on the beats, and the accompaniment of the left hand harmonically has a substantial syncopation. That was E flat better. And then if I play just the second violin, the bottom stems of the right hand with the upper stems of the left hand, the viola of the imaginary string quartet. You feel like it's always up the beat, never established, even the downbeat of the bass with the soprano. And one should always avoid accents on the downbeats and always float further. It's not finished. And add the second violin, but in the shadow of the top first violin, and add the syncopation in the viola part on top of the bass, but not do it by capsules of beats or group of beats, but a flow of a run-on sentence. And he says pianissimo, but it could be mostly, well, the publisher says. Of course, the instruments were not the same, he didn't even have a piano, but regardless, the imagination is there. The texture is syncretetisch, at least in 4 parts. I think the pianissimo would be more for the accompaniment, inner voices. And the melody would be perhaps mezzo piano. And I would suggest to have an impulse on the 16th note, which is the delayed 2nd eighth note of the melody, instead of being in equal values. Is delayed by the dotted rhythm, but it's also relaunched by the 16th note into the next dotted eighth. And when you have repeated notes, or you have moving parts, that rises you compared to the static, you have to be melodic in both cases. If not, he would have written something melodic. Thankfully he didn't do any of this, but then when you play, you want to do the repeated note melodic inside the rebounds of the key lifting, ta ta ta, and not ta ta, but not fully replayed. So the melodic note repeated continues to be driven towards the next changing, in this case, step motion. Repeated step motion, third. Step motion, augmented second. Repeated twice. And this harmonic structure of going to secondary dominance of 2nd degree, C minor, the dominant, and back to this. They create their own chromatic, not in this case chromatic really, but at least their colorization, chroma, meaning color in Greek, but I meant colorized harmonically. And then he goes into a third variation, which is more the active one, because the theme and the first variation are more contemplative. You observe something of nature, but you don't act into it, and the action comes in variation 2. I added in major 9th, he didn't do. Not yet. And this kind of happiness that all of a sudden flies free like a bird out of the cage. And the syncopation with the left hand becoming much lighter than the held ones in the first times. There's something about the coquette of the Schubert carnival. Something spontaneous and lively and faster, but in a rubato, not too much obviously. Are you almost tempted not to align every beat, the 2 hands, to avoid that verticality? Of course you don't want to dislocate them willingly, but you would like to have the difference of character between the 2 hands. This kind of cunning, playful right hand, hyper decorated, and this left hand that stays holding back with the syncopation is to say, oh no, I don't play that game. Instead of having the 2 collaborating, the 2 hands perhaps differentiating themselves. In the second half he switches to the left hand doing the many notes. chromatic scales, quick notes. It's just so charming, and the word charming sounds a belittling when it's not meant to be. It's just so fresh. It's almost like springtime and you see birds, imagine, dropping on different tree branches. And of course, the immediate response to this is a minor variation that has 3 against 4 and this kind of sense of struggle and drama in the right hand. And this forzando being on the arrival note, which is the under higher note. So it's not anticlimactic, but almost. The pattern of the triplets in the left hand is therefore the anxiety, creating very short roller coaster hairpin. Could it be or not? Should it be or not? And the melody in octaves. Holds the structure of the theme, even in minor, of course. It's just more of a mood coating, but he's very compositionally obedient and doesn't break through away from the expression of the complete theme with its 2 halves in the relative major in this case. And this is very interesting to observe how he creates a mood in the immediate first chord that he uses in the second half when he goes in D flat major, the relative in case. But he doesn't stay on it. He immediately harmonizes it in E flat minor. So it's always this sense of expression through the harmonic colorization. That's the word perhaps more than chromatization. Of a well-being and then intention. Minor is not Sturm und Drang dramatically, but more about hope and despair and desire and fear, and perhaps some level of shyness, while also with an inner drive to express something meaningful about the feelings of the character narrating the story or being the story himself. And then, unlike in the other 3 variations, he doesn't do this other than in this one. He has an insert. And then returns. A glimpse away from the drama where it's also narrator speaking or the storyteller telling a daydream hope that is interrupting the main flow of the dramatic variation. And that is very nice because he doesn't do it systematically, so you don't expect it. And if it comes, it's really a contrast of Sturm und Drang of sorts. But perhaps there is a continuity throughout. It's more like fragmented for orchestral structural sections like strings, winds, and alternating. And then should go directly to. But in fact, he interrupts. Into this heroic dark moment of music, and the way he comes out of it, instead of returning to the D flat major of the original key, in which he has to return ultimately because he now is in B flat minor, he uses this most marvelous variation number 4. be moved when I perform or teach or hear or speak about these theme and variations written by these composers, when of course they have to naturally work on the canvas of the structure of the theme in each different decorated variation. And then at one point they have one variation that goes so far away that comes from somewhere else almost, as if they manage to make us forget the theme for a moment and go in a distant key. For instance, Schumann in his symphonic etudes in dark key of C sharp minor manages, after all the variations that are very C sharp minorish, to have this moment of shiver in G sharp minor and the melody in the right hand. You almost walk in this beautiful garden and you choose an alley that might bring you somewhere where you don't know where it is, but you're so deliciously happy to be slightly allowing yourself to feel like you're lost. But you're not lost, you just know where you go, but you like to let yourself just float for a variation where it's not the restatement more textually of the theme, and all of a sudden you feel like in the sum of another piece. And he finishes that with a dominant in order to return to the final variation, number 5. And that is so tender. It feels like as if he writes glissandi in B flat major. Just to say, not practical with the 2 black keys, right? To play real glissando like in C major. With the white keys easier to do, but it's kind of bird song-like style texture in the right hand, and the left hand remaining always in its a little bit distant, not to overshadow the right hand syncopation, but lightness, always up, never heavy down beat. And Schumann in his Abeg variations finishes with this kind of stardust notes dropping, pearls, and here he does. So there's a cousinage perhaps. It's charming more than virtuosic. Oh, it's virtuosic because charming. But so far away from the drama or the distant G flat in mood, or the first variation. Complements the theme, hugging it in its own new coating. So he explores in these variations very little differences, but he establishes within few bars only different universes of expression, of being. And then he ends up by doing what Beethoven did in 109 and Bach in Goldberg, restating the theme, but not textually like the first time, but with a harmonization. And for once, he uses an upbeat. Whenever in the opening theme he states it is a downbeat. It's not. It's not ta ta ta, it's ta 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 ta, ta 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 ta, and even with a little bridge of 3/8 notes into it, it doesn't restart, but with a nano micro caesura, with a nano little fermatina, as if you catch your breath to sing the next syllable, of which the next word starts, of imaginary song. And here he restates it, but with the upbeat. You wonder if it's just intention to quote at the end the theme with an upbeat when he stated it without, or is it just perhaps a spontaneous mishap? Whichever the cause, the root, and the the consequence is that it's so beautiful, which is sort of cancels all ideas of analyzing it. Just surrender to its evidence. And because it's not complex in the harmonization, I think it's needing the repetitivity of the theme again. It's a appoggiatura in the second half of the first opening. Should have been 9/7. Sorry, 7/6. But he jumps down the fifth, and then he goes to the resolution after. Little cunning tensions and releases that overlap each other. I don't want to analyze his intention. Just enjoy the presentation of his bouquet for all the senses of our humanity. Second time again, repeating to state it with a D, C, B twice, and only the last time, in the ending 3 bars, the D becomes E. So he chooses when, la note juste, as Mademoiselle Boulanger used to say, the chosen note, la note choisie. Well, it's just if it's choisi, but the point is that he chooses what and when. He didn't do it from the get-go. And then here's the voyage. It was so predictable and cheesy right away. But here it's so reserved, as if it's shy, which it is in expression. And only the last time the third instead of the second. Does such detail determine the understanding, the loving, the rendering of what we understand, feel, and hear from the text that came to us after all these centuries? Probably too much detail overrides the flow of the statement. It takes time to combine the micro and the macro. All the details, all the meanings, and the natural flow on top. It's not either or, it's both. It's being in the box and thinking outside of the box. Feeling the piece for each expression that is hinted or deeply movingly represented in the score, and therefore in the music. And then the little details are appreciated because you look at the score and you learn it and you memorize it and you observe and you contrast and you say, oh, this is how it evolves, this is how it differs, this is how it's alike, this is what this is what that, and how do I do it when I play? How do I mean it in my playing, not in my speaking? How do I translate it through my psyche, of my own filtering? And I think that the best is to say to oneself, okay, perhaps it's not in my time period the expression to repeat simple things several times, but when they're earnest, they should be told. It's almost like an inner confession. It's something that you tell to your consciousness or perhaps to somebody dear to you, and you say it in simple words, but they mean what they really should mean, when very often we use those simple words, like uses simple harmonies in the sense of daily ones, not dramatically complex, in order to express the simplicity of the goodness that comes out of this expression of music. I think that earnest goodness is probably the mood where I think this piece enchants our souls with. Thank you.